As we open the book of James, he's very big about a faith that works. And he says a faith that works actually works with people. In fact, God's people are actually supposed to be good with people. And as you know, I've had a little difficulty trying to decide how to name this section of this book. I've come up with People Works. But my original working title, which I shared with you before, is if you're a Christian who says you love God, then love people. Truly love them. Real people with real actions of love, period. Don't just say it. Seriously, do it. That's kind of like what I get from James, like actually live it out. Because the Christian life is about love, and the Christian life is about relationships, God and people. And he wants to get very practical and very direct, and that is that if you say you have a relationship with God and you actually do love God, we should be able to see that in how you deal with people. They go together. Today he's going to address some of the eternal themes of pride and envy and selfish ambition and how that destroys us and it destroys relationships. The quest for power. He's going to address the topics of wisdom. And he says if you're really a wise person, you're going to be a peaceful person. You're going to be a relational person. You're going to do things that help relationships. So he's going to contrast kind of an earthly demonic wisdom with a heavenly spiritual wisdom. What he calls, true wisdom with like a false wisdom. There is a humble wisdom that comes from God, but there's a prideful wisdom that comes from the world. It's very cerebral, but not thoughtful. And it's kind of a hostile wisdom, an uppity sort of wisdom where everyone thinks they know the issues of the day, whether it be global warming or the issue of life or the European Union or how the wise way that the world should supposedly go. It sounds very PC, but often is not very people-loving and is very destructive. So he in his own candor deals with this false wisdom that often has an envy and a strife and a boasting and a deceit about it, with a true spiritual wisdom that has a peace and a gentleness and a mercy and a sincerity about it. Let's read the passage and then we'll unpack it together. I'm in James chapter 3, starting in verse 13. Who is wise and understanding among you? Let them show it by their good life, and by the behaviors and deeds that they've actually done in the humility that comes from wisdom. But if you harbor bitter envy and selfish ambition in your hearts, don't boast about it. And don't deny the truth. Such, quote, wisdom does not come from heaven, but is earthly, unspiritual, it's even demonic. For where you have envy and selfish ambition, there you're going to find disorder, every kind of evil practice. But the wisdom that actually comes from heaven, that comes from above, is first of all pure, and then it's peace-loving, considerate, submissive, full of mercy and good fruits, impartial and sincere, peacemakers who sow in peace reap a harvest of righteousness. Okay, so we'll have to unpack this a little bit, but James basically says in chapter 1, if you have a tried and true faith, you're going to have to be able to get through testing and trials and tribulations, and you're going to have to, like if you're the real deal, you'll get through that in the crucible of conflict that occurs in life. By the time he gets to chapter 2, he says you're going to be people of the Word, but not just hearers of the Word, you're actually going to do it. Like if you say you're really a follower, you actually don't want to just hear from God, You want to hear so you can live it and implement it. And then he starts to deal in chapter 3 with very practicals, like if you're really a follower of faith, you're going to bridle your tongue. Because like a little rudder steers an entire ship, or a bridle can steer a horse, if you can't control or don't have some self-governance over your mouth, then you're not much different than the pagan world and the heathen who have to skew everything. And by the way, it does give away a little bit what's going on in your heart. So it can expose you. So be careful, because relationships have a lot to do with words, and now he says relationships have a lot to do with peacemaking too. Really wise people have a way about them that builds relationships and is loving. Doesn't mean we're not different. We are. Every one of us is so different, with different backgrounds, different genders, different upbringings, with different strengths and talents and IQs and EQs. We have a lot of different ways we come to the world. But real, true believers have a humility and a wisdom about them that lets them get along and be peaceable, and they work out differences, and they learn to compromise, and they go for bigger goals and transcendent purposes. They're not known just by pride and envy and selfish ambition. So James wants to address that. So let's go to verse 13, and we'll unpack it a little bit together. He gives the hypothetical question, who is Sophos? Who's wise and understanding among you? Who really are the learned, the intelligent, the well-instructed among you? Wise is a Greek word concept that has to do with kind of speculative knowledge. You know, who's the wise one theoretically? Like they're philosophically wise. Understanding is more the specialized knowledge. It tends to be very specific. So who are the great thinkers and the great implementers among you? Well, let them show it, or let him show it by his good life. Here James gets really practical again. If you're really that wise, let's see it by your deeds, like your conduct. Live an exemplary life and lifestyle. Let that be your testimony, your conduct, your behavior, by your deeds, your ergos, your works that are done in humility, in a sense of gentleness and meekness. Humility is the right use of power, and wisdom has to do with the right use of knowledge. Let him do it in humility that comes from real wisdom. It's interesting, this week, it just seemed like the headlines in our nation were a lot about power. Who has the power? Who's in control? And lots of... James is like, well, if you're a humble person, you can handle power, but you do it with a meekness. And if you have a real wisdom, you do it in a way that doesn't destroy people because of your own gain or your own aims or your own motives. The Message translates verse 13 this way. Do you want to be counted as wise? To build a reputation of wisdom? Well, here's what you do. Live well, live wisely, and live humbly. It's the way you live, not the way you talk, that counts. You can see James is very, very practical. It's like, if you really want to be wise, let's see you live it out. When I think of the privilege of studying academically to UCLA and then getting a master's and getting a PhD, I have had the privilege of teaching at a university for 10 years, and I've always enjoyed environments of learning. The motto at UCLA is "Let there be light," but I can't tell you how many classes I had that was decades ago, not today. There was no light. The teaching was crazy. I was a brand new Christian. I was a 1-year-old Christian when I went to UCLA. And it was clear to me, there was an agenda. It was clear to me that they were teaching just crazy stuff. I'm a very inquisitive person. You know, I'm a curious person. I ask a lot of questions. And I was known as a talker in my classes. And it's like, well, where did you get that? You know, why should we believe that? You know, and there was a muzzling, a tamping down of, well, I don't need to address that. Like, you just need to buy in. Well, I didn't buy in. I still don't buy it. I was happy to receive low grades for my papers because I didn't do the party line. And I would meet with my professors. I'm like, the papers, I think this is a good paper. I think you just don't agree with me. And do you really want to punish me because I don't agree with you? I thought the motto here at UCLA was let there be light. Apparently it's just to stay in the darkness and no one can think outside of your own thinking. Well, that was decades ago. Today, what a nightmare. I don't even know if I would encourage people to go to university today. I don't want to be overly controversial this morning, but James does seem to say, look, there's a wisdom that's not like really wise, and there's a wisdom that really is wise, and we better figure that out. Verse 14. He says, if you harbor Xylon Picron, we get zealot from Xylon. Picron is like a pointed, prickly word. It's translated here, if you harbor bitter envy, or it could be translated like a sharp jealousy. It's kind of a harsh zeal. If you harbor like blind fanaticism, which I have to confess, I see on the TV all the time now. This is where we just see in blue or we just see in red. It's just all party. There's no sense of like caring for the other side, trying to understand, to hear, to bridge. If you harbor this bitter envy and then this selfish ambition, this self-seeking rivalry, factioning, strifing, party spirit in your hearts. If you're contentious, don't boast about it. Don't be arrogant and brag about it. Don't be so self-glorifying about it. Don't get off on some ego trip. He's really uncovering the human glorification here. And then don't deny the truth. This was interesting for me this week to be studying this passage because James is, again, very, very candid here. He's like, you have a lot of issues that are coming out in your so-called wisdom, and it seems very self-centered. And it seems rooted in a bad heart. And you seem to be proud about it. And worse yet, you deny the truth about it. It's clear you don't want the truth. It's clear you have an agenda. It's clear you're going after something. Does anyone really care what's in my yearbook when I was 17 about my life today? Decades later? Is that really what we're after? James says, your ambition is tainted and it belies the truth. You're not speaking the truth. Here's how the Message translates verse 14. Mean-spirited ambition isn't wisdom. Boasting that you're wise isn't wisdom. Twisting the truth to make yourself sound wise, PC, enlightened, cool is not wisdom. Verse 15, he says that kind of wisdom, it doesn't come down from heaven. There's nothing godly about it. This is not something God would be proud of, and I'm going to give you 3 adjectives to describe what kind of wisdom I think this is. It's earthly, so it's not from God. It's part of a closed system. It comes from a circumscribed box. It comes from a party line. It comes from a political dogma, if you will. It's unspiritual, so it's completely natural, fleshly. It's not sukkakos. It's not soulish. It's from the fallen, unredeemed parts. It's devoid of the Spirit. And James, being as candid as he is, he's like, it's of the devil. I'll just shoot straight. I don't think we're going to see that on CNN or Fox News or MSNBC or anywhere. But he's like, look, there's a great war going on for the truth these days. And James is like, I'm just going to tell you right out front, it's not just earthly, it's demonic. He is the father of lies. And he is accuser of the brethren. And his strategy has always been and will always be to take good men and women down by lying about them and falsely accusing them. That is his strategy. It's been a strategy from day one. This is nothing new. Jesus was crucified and falsely accused. Stephen, the first martyr of the Christian faith, was falsely accused. Every one of our disciples who was murdered was falsely accused. This is part and parcel of living a good life. Now, if you don't live a good life, and you're not making an impact, and you're hidden somewhere, and you're not like changing the world, don't worry. You're not a threat to Satan, and you might not have anyone say anything. But as soon as you start to make headway, as soon as you might be able to be in a place to actually make decisions, to impact the court, to impact the nation, to impact your local city, to impact the church, to impact your family, you can count on false accusations. You can count on crazy stuff. You can count on demonic activity. And demonic activity is about lies and accusations. Those are his two titles. It couldn't be any more clear. It's not about pitchforks, red devils, just seances and Halloween cuckoo-ness. It's about lies and accusations. That's who he is. That's what he's the father of. That's what he does with the brethren. You can count on it. The Message translates verse 15 this way. It's the furthest thing from wisdom. It's cunning, it's devilish, it's conniving. Verse 16. Now, where you have envy and selfish ambition, you're going to find a lot of cuckoo-ness. And he has no problem listing it for us. Disorder, akatasia, it means disharmony or disarray, commotion, confusion. That is like the number one strategy of lies and accusations, is to make everyone confused. Like, I don't know what to believe. I just don't know. I mean, someone said this, someone said that. I don't know. The best thing we could do is eliminate this nomination. Eliminate this. Have this person resign. We probably should have that CEO step aside. It's just too confusing. Disorder is the thing that this is all about. This is exactly what we had with the Tower of Babel in Genesis 11. Nothing new here. Where all the people colluded together and says, what we'll build is this great tower of wisdom because they're so smart and stuff. And God had to come in and said, no, that kind of globalism is evil. Things like the European Union, globalism, centralized governments, merging of nations is actually evil. This goes back to Genesis 11. And I am going to eliminate that, and I'm going to spread you out and give you different languages so you're not going to be able to collude together to become a world order to rival God. No, I actually have nation states so that if one nation goes bad, the others can be a hedge against the evil because power intrinsically corrupts. And so I'm going to split you up into little pieces, not one big piece, where you can try to rival God. Because you think you're so smart. This is the wisdom of the world. Like, we'll all do it together. We'll merge our economies, and we'll have a united court for the whole world. We're so smart. And James is like, this is evil. You desire to cause disorder, and then every kind of evil practice you can think of comes out of this. Every kind of worthless, baseless practice. It's going to be racial. It's going to be ethnic. It's going to be social. It's going to be economic. There's going to be confusion about what a man and a woman is. It's that basic. It's like people won't even know what a man is anymore. It's like it's going to be so confusing. Like God couldn't make it any simpler, but we're so wise now that gender is fluid and you can be whatever you want to be. It's like, wow. And your ethnicity, it'll be racial, and we'll have all kinds of confusion about races and diversity and background. It's like it's gonna be so wise though. It's gonna be so beautiful because it's gonna be so tolerant. And James is like, this is nuts. Verse 17. The wisdom that comes from heaven, like real divine wisdom, the wisdom that comes from God. And by the way, remember, James has already said in chapter 1, every good and perfect gift is from what? Above, coming down from the Father of heavenly lights. And by the way, Paul has a different emphasis. Paul is always emphasizing the Spirit. And so we did a lot on the Holy Spirit. And he's like, if it's really spiritual, James goes a little different angle, if it's really wise. So they're slightly different. One's kind of emphasizing the spirit, and the other's emphasizing the mind. But Paul said, set your heart on the things above, and your mind on the things above. And here he's like saying, well, every wise thing comes from heaven. Our Father's in heaven. Our citizenship's in heaven. Our treasures to be put in heaven. Our home is in heaven. Our hope is in heaven. He's like, the wisdom that really comes from above is totally different from the world. It's totally different. And I'll give you a list of some things you can consider. First of all, proton, like we get prototype from that. It's pure, agonai. It's basically innocent. It's clean. It has integrity. It has sincerity. It's not contaminated. And then it's Irenaikos. Irene is the term for peace. We sometimes name our daughters Irene. It's peace-loving. Man's wisdom always divides. Man's wisdom is very divisive. And you can just turn on the news and just watch that. A, B, C, D, E, F. It's like, oh my goodness, can you agree with anything? No, absolutely not. They're totally for the president. They're totally against the president. They're totally for this policy. It's like, are there any mediators or bridge people in between? Anyone who sees some wisdom from the other side so we can try to understand it? Because we're going to be doing this every 2 to 4 years. Right? We already know how this goes. We're going to be switching back and forth. So why aren't we going to be a little wiser? Well, we're not. We're not peace lovers. Man's wisdom always leads to competition and rivalry and war, one writer says. Okay, it's also considerate. It means it's forbearing. It's Matthew Arnold wrote an article on this. He called it a sweet reasonableness. As a translation for this. I thought that was really cool. Any of you like Abraham Lincoln, right? He lived in a time where our nation was as divided as it seems like it is today. And Lincoln wrote about velvet steel. I don't know if any of you have seen, but he had a way of talking about we need to have fiber, but we have to have a softness in dealing with these very difficult issues. And we need a sweet reasonableness. We need a considerateness. And this is what Christians are known for. They're not spineless, but they're relational. He goes on to say submissive as well. Submissive is actually a hearing term. It means they have a reasonable willingness to listen. I thought that was interesting this week in particular. In other words, they're easy to live with and work with. They can disagree, but they're not disagreeable. So James says they have an approachable, agreeable, reasonable, willing to listenness about them. And then, of course, they're full of mercy. The wisdom that comes from God is compassion. People are compassionate and they're caring. They care about the Good Samaritan, even someone who's not like them, that they don't know, particularly if they're in a tough place. And there's lots of good fruits, James says. There's lots of karpos. There's lots of things you can see If you abide in the Father, if you're attached, if the branch is connected to the vine, you're going to bear a lot of fruit. There's going to be a lot of great outcomes organically. You'll be impartial. Adiakritas. And you're not just going to be kritas, you're not just going to be critical, you're going to be impartial in your thoughtfulness. And you'll be sincere. Anupaktitros. This is a term that means you're not going to pretend. You're not going to be a hypocrite. You're not going to be false-faced. You'll be open. You won't be like the Pharisees, the crazies of the day. And then he ends out our passage today by saying in verse 18, peacemakers. These are really relationally wise, true disciples who love God and love people. Peacemakers who sow in peace. They will raise a harvest of righteousness, of goodness. There'll be great outcomes for true believers. The Message translates verse 18 this way. Real wisdom, God's wisdom, begins with a holy life, but it's characterized most by getting along with others. This seems to be what James is trying to get to. If you say you're a true believer, then you have to be a lover. You have to be a lover of people. That's real people. On the blue side and the red side. People who are different than you. People who think differently. Even people that are immature. Sinful, fallen, broken people. But you still will be known by being a certain kind of way. You won't be a divisive person. You're not going to be a flamethrower. You're going to be a peace, a bridge-building kind of person. And each seed you sow will reap a harvest, by the way, one day. Because the Prince of Peace is looking for people like him. Not like divisive Romans, pagans, or others. You'll be known as getting along. That's the wisdom that comes from above versus the false wisdom that comes from below. And he's trying to argue, I think, a little bit, don't confuse kind of knowledge with wisdom. The world has more and more knowledge now than any other time in human history, and it's the dumbest it's ever been. You know what I mean, right? I think that's why he's camping on the wisdom piece. They have all this great intellect, but they do the stupidest stuff, not even common sense stuff. Henry David Thoreau warned that there's a time when there'll be improved means to unimproved ends. That was his clever way of saying we might get more knowledge and insight, we might even unlock the secrets of the universe, but we won't know what to do with them. And what we do with that knowledge won't be very good. If you don't have a soul and you don't have a heart and you're not connected to God, it could be a real nightmare. Now, if you don't have wisdom, James has already said in chapter 1, remember, anyone who lacks wisdom, let him ask from God, and he will give it to us generously and without reproach. So he actually started his letter by saying, none of us are totally that wise, but if we do want wisdom, I would go to God. And he says, if you are wise, you'll see it in your good works, in your behaviors, in your humility. Man's wisdom comes from reason. God's wisdom comes from revelation. Man's wisdom will come to nothing. God's wisdom will last forever. If you're really a Christian who loves God, you're going to need to show that you're a lover of people, and that may be hard for you, and you may say, I totally like people. I don't either sometimes. But we know that's what we're asking the Spirit to do in our hearts, and we're asking Him to make us different and more peaceable. That doesn't mean we have to collude or lay down or become Mr. Rogers. We can have the teeth of a tiger, but we need to have a relationalness about us. Because God's people are supposed to be good with people. And James says here, who is wise and understanding among you? Let him show it by his good life. In the darkness, in the rain, amidst the chaos, just be your good enough self. In closing, I wrote a few notes to myself. If I'm wise, I won't compromise my integrity because wisdom is pure. And so that could be a struggle, but I want to be as honest of a man as I can be. I wrote, if I'm wise, I won't antagonize the anger of others, trying to compare and condemn or contradict them, because real wisdom is peacemaking and peace-loving. I'll try to build bridges and find common ground, and that would probably be wise. If I'm wise, I won't minimize other people's feelings, because wisdom that comes from God is considerate. It's sensitive to other people's realities, even if those realities are different. It has a relational style to it. If I'm wise, I won't criticize other people's suggestions, because wisdom is supposedly, it has a submissiveness. It's open to it's a hearing term, at least listening. Like, it's not threatened to listen. It's like, this may be hard to hear because your world is so different. I am with friends sometimes, I'm like, I don't even know how they see the world that way, but their lens is different, and I want to be wise enough to at least hear and try to understand that. If I'm wise, I won't emphasize the mistakes of others, because wisdom is full of mercy, and it's gracious and it's compassionate. And if I'm wise, I won't disguise my feelings and my motives, as so many do. James seems to cut through that. We're supposed to have a sincere, impartial heart, and we're supposed to concede when we don't really, when our motives aren't good. We're supposed to tell people, I'm sorry. I'll give you an example this week. This week, I'm not the best person to ask about all the stuff that's happening in the news this week, because it's too close to my world right now still. It's too, and so, for any time you see me overstep or put too much of me in it, thank you for your grace, and just try to let that go and try to hear what God has to say. But James was on to something that is timeless and true, and that is the father of lies and the accuser of the brethren has been that way from the very beginning. There's nothing new about that. And James seems to be saying, if you really love God, you're going to have to love people. It's going to be complicated, but you're going to have a wisdom that comes from above, not from below. And ultimately that wisdom is relational, because it comes down to peacemaking. You think you're so smart and so smug. You can have all the great theories in the world. But if you're not good with bridging relationships with people, if it doesn't work in your family, if you can't work it out with a colleague who's different, if you can't make it happen, and James is so concerned with the church, let alone what happens in the civic state, he goes, then we're not the salt and light. We're peacemakers. Can we control that? No. And that's why the scriptures say, live at peace with one another as far as you're able. As best you can. And then in the end, we'll have real peace. Amen?